Kimbolton Castle sits in the flat country north of Cambridge, on the old road toward Peterborough. On the 8th of January, 1536, at the request of the constable of the castle, a local candlemaker was brought into the private apartments in the western wing to prepare a body for burial. The chandler was a candlemaker by trade. Medieval chandlers handled wax, and they handled the wrapping of the dead, and in the countryside they handled the crude first work of embalming. He had prepared bodies before. He had not prepared this one. The body on the table had been Henry VIII's first queen for almost 24 years. She had died the previous afternoon, at approximately 2 o'clock, of what her attendants had recorded as a slow collapse of some months running. The chandler opened the chest, exposed the heart, and reported to the constable within the hour. The heart was black, not discolored, not shadowed by settled blood. Black on the outside, black on the inside, and carrying a growth on its surface the chandler had never seen and had no word for. The subject is biologically female. Biological age at the moment of death, 50 years and 22 days. Born at Alcalá de Henares in the Kingdom of Castile on the 16th of December, 1485. Youngest surviving daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Died at Kimbolton Castle in the county of Huntingdonshire on the 7th of January, 1536. Preservation. Embalmed the day after death by a local candlemaker under the direction of the constable of the castle. Sealed in a lead inner coffin. Buried on the 29th of January at Peterborough Abbey. Cause of death per the historical record. Contested. 2 readings held the field within days of the death. The first was ordinary decline in a body worn down by exile and cold and poor food. The second was poison. That was the reading that traveled. What we are doing today is rebuilding the autopsy from the body up. Cause of death. Mechanism. Manner. Time. The chandler saw something on the surface of the heart that he had no vocabulary for. Modern pathology has that vocabulary. It has had it for the better part of a century. The case file has been sitting open for 490 years, and the finding on it has been misread for every one of them. The reproductive record of the woman on the table has been the subject of another file on this channel. Her 6 pregnancies and the single surviving daughter she carried to term were signed there, alongside the same losses on the 2 queens who followed her, to the blood of the man she married. This file is a different file. This is the file on the queen herself, and it opens on the finding, no one in 1536 knew how to read. The historical narrative. The reading the poison theory rests on. Catherine had been the wife of Henry VIII from the 11th of June, 1509, until the 23rd of May, 1533. On that day, at Dunstable Priory, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer declared her marriage to the king null. She had been Queen of England for almost 24 years. She was replaced by the second wife within days. She was moved from house to house across the next 2.5 years. The Moor, Ampthill, Buckden, Kimbolton. She was placed under the supervision of Sir Edmund Bedingfield and a household reduced to the smallest her rank would allow. The king forbade her to be called queen. She continued to sign her letters, Catherine the Queen. Her daughter Mary was kept from her. Her Spanish attendants were dismissed one by one. The rooms at Kimbolton were reduced to a small suite in the wing of the castle furthest from the fires. The winter of 1535 to 1536 was long and cold in the Fen country. Her health had been declining since October. Maria de Salinas, Baroness Willoughby de Eresby, one of the Spanish women who had served Catherine since her youth, had been refused permission to visit her through the final months. On New Year's Day, 1536, she forced her way into Kimbolton after dark and told the king's servants she was there by his leave. She had no such leave. She was let in. She was at Catherine's bedside for the final days of the case. In the final weeks, the fear of poison entered the sick room. Catherine's own physician, Miguel de la Soa, believed she was being slowly poisoned, and word of it reached her nephew, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. That was the reading in the room by December, when the chandler's report of the Black Heart reached the Imperial Ambassador Eustace Chapuys in London within days of the death. It was the reading that fit the dispatch he sent to Charles V. Chapuys wrote to the emperor that Catherine had been poisoned. The heart, he told Charles, had been examined and found to be entirely black inside, and to have a black growth on the outside that resisted every wash. He advanced the reading with the certainty of a man who had been telling the emperor for 2 years that the English court was capable of it. The chandler reported what he saw, and stopped. Chapuys reported what he needed the emperor to hear. The second reading was more genteel and no more medical. English chroniclers of the Tudor period and the biographers who inherited them wrote that Catherine had died of a broken heart. The word heart carried metaphorically grief for her marriage, for her daughter, for her home. The black growth was folded quietly into the metaphor. The heart of the queen had broken outright. Neither reading opens the body. There is a finding on the body that neither the poison reading nor the broken heart reading accounted for. It is the finding the chandler wrote down and could not name: the external examination of the body. Catherine's attendants at Kimbolton had watched her decline through the autumn and winter. The final weeks recorded weight loss to the point of what modern medicine calls cachexia, the catabolic wasting of the body under advanced disease, skin that had gone yellow, nausea after any solid food, vomiting late in the illness, chest pain the physicians attributed to the stomach. In the last hours, she had been able to keep down only broth. She had heard Mass at 2 o'clock in the morning on the day of her death. She had received her confessor. She had dictated her last letter to the king. She had died at approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The description of her skin as yellow is the first anchor. Jaundice in a 50-year-old woman with weight loss, chest pain, and vomiting can be produced by several disease processes: liver failure, advanced gallbladder disease, malignancy of the abdominal or thoracic organs. What the description misses on every count is arsenic. Acute arsenic poisoning at doses sufficient to kill by weeks-long decline produces vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, hair loss, and a rice water stool. Jaundice is not part of arsenic's classic picture, and it leaves the heart intact. The chandler opened the body in a room without instruments and without a coroner. What he found there is what the historians have been arguing about ever since. The chest cavity was ordinary. The lungs and the great vessels reported nothing that alarmed him. The abdominal organs went unrecorded at any specific length in the surviving report. And then he opened the pericardium and found the heart of the woman he had been sent to prepare. The heart was intact in size. It was blackened on the surface, and attached to the outer wall of the heart, on the surviving report by the man who examined it, was a growth that was hideous in appearance and enormous on the scale of a chandler's frame of reference for what a heart looked like. He washed the heart. The blackness stayed on. He cut into it. The interior of the ventricles was black. He removed the heart from the body. The dark growth on the outer wall remained attached. That is the finding. Everything on the case file since 1536 has been built on it. There is one more question at the finding, and it is not one Chapuys asked. It is what the pathology of a heart in 1536 could produce a finding of that shape. In modern autopsy practice, a heart that is black on the interior of the ventricles and carries a black growth on the exterior wall is a heart destroyed by tissue, not by toxin. Toxins blacken myocardium at post-mortem in a different pattern. Toxins produce microscopic damage invisible to a chandler's eye. What blackens the outer surface of a heart and colonizes the interior of the chambers when a physical growth is attached to the outer wall is tissue. I have read this pattern before, not in a museum. There was a case in the middle of the 1990s in a hospital in Ohio of a man in his early 60s who had come in with weight loss and unexplained chest pain across the preceding 4 months. He died in the emergency department under observation for something else. The autopsy opened his chest and found a soft, dark mass on the outer wall of his heart approximately the size of a small fist. Some of the fibers of the myocardium beneath had been colonized. The final report signed it as a primary cardiac melanoma. It is one of the rarest tumors in oncology. It kills the way a tumor kills, and the black on the tissue at autopsy is pigment. Pigment, not settled blood. The pigment on primary and metastatic cardiac melanoma is melanin, the same molecule that darkens the skin of a summer forearm and stains a mole. Melanoma cells retain the pigment as they proliferate. When those cells colonize the heart, the tissue stains the same way a mole stains skin, on a scale the naked eye can see across the room. The chandler at Kimbolton had no words for melanin or melanoma. He had eyes. What his eyes reported was pigment on the interior of an organ that had no business carrying pigment on the interior. That is what he wrote down. The literature on primary cardiac tumors is thin because they are rare. Metastatic cardiac melanoma, in which a primary melanoma of the skin or of a mucous membrane has seeded into the pericardial and myocardial tissue, is less rare than the primary form, though still uncommon. Both produce a black heart at autopsy. Both produce a growth on the surface of the heart the naked eye can see. Both kill by displacement of cardiac muscle, by disturbance of cardiac rhythm, and by hemorrhage into the pericardial sac in the terminal event. The chandler's frame of reference for a heart in 1536 was healthy tissue. What he saw was neoplastic tissue. It was a tumor. The clinical vocabulary for what he was looking at would take another 3 centuries to arrive. If this kind of work, reading bodies the textbooks have given up on, is something you want more of, the subscribe button is where you say so. Another case file lands most weeks on this channel. The reconciliation. What the chandler saw against what Chapuys wrote. Chapuys read the chandler's report through the frame of a court that had spent almost 3 years reducing Catherine of Aragon to a private captive. A captive whose own physician, in her final month, feared she was being poisoned. The Imperial Ambassador served an emperor who had every political reason to want the finding to be poison. Charles V was Catherine's nephew, the head of the Habsburg dynasty in Europe, and the sovereign on whose diplomatic pressure the papacy had refused Henry VIII's annulment for 6 long years. A poisoned queen was a casus for imperial complaint. A queen with a heart tumor was a natural death. The poison reading is a reading of the reporter. It survived because it was more useful than the finding, and because the finding sat unread for centuries. The broken heart reading is a reading of the culture. It survived because it was more comfortable than the finding, and because the metaphor of a heart broken in the flesh fit the 16th century imagination, the finding never could. Modern medical reading, most fully argued by the Tudor historian Giles Tremlett, treats the chandler's report as the description, in Tremlett's own words, of a secondary melanotic sarcoma seeded from a primary elsewhere in the body. Whether the pigmented tumor was sarcoma or melanoma is beyond reach at this distance without tissue. Metastatic melanoma to the heart is one possibility, and the leading one on the pigment. Primary cardiac melanoma is another. Primary cardiac sarcoma with a hemorrhagic component is a third. The available description holds the class open at 3, and places the death in the category of natural cardiac malignancy. It moves the death out of the category of homicide. Cause of death for Catherine of Aragon: cardiac malignancy, most consistent on the surviving Chandler's description with a pigmented cardiac tumor, primary or metastatic, of hemorrhagic type. The interior blackening of the ventricles and the visible external growth on the outer wall of the heart are the finding. Mechanism of death: cardiac failure from tumor infiltration of the myocardium, with a probable terminal component of hemorrhage into the pericardial sac. The final hours as recorded by her attendants: broth only, chest pain the physicians attributed to the stomach, vomiting, weakness that increased across the last night, are the clinical signature of a heart in the final decompensation of neoplastic infiltration. Manner of death: natural. Time of death: approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the 7th of January, 1536, at Kimbolton Castle. The category in which this death was filed in 1536 by the ambassador who reported it was homicide by poison. The correct classification is natural death by cardiac malignancy. The refile is centuries overdue. There is one more question, and it is not medical. It is the question of what the wrong reading did. The court at Greenwich responded to the news in yellow. Chapuys, the Imperial Ambassador, reported that the king wore yellow from head to foot, all but a white feather in his bonnet, and read it as a celebration. The chronicler Edward Hall wrote that Anne Boleyn wore yellow too, but Hall called it mourning. Even the color on their backs got 2 readings. 22 days later, on the 29th of January, the day Catherine of Aragon was buried at Peterborough, Anne Boleyn miscarried a male child at approximately 3.5 months of gestation. She was on a scaffold inside the inner ward of the Tower of London before the 5th month closed. The case file on her closed in another video. Catherine's body arrived at Peterborough Abbey on the 28th of January. She was buried on the north side of the chancel the following morning. The king stayed away. His daughter Mary stayed away. The king had ordered the funeral conducted at the rank of Dowager Princess of Wales, the widow of his older brother Arthur, rather than the widow of the king. In 1536, she went into the ground without her queenly title, under the title of a marriage that had ended when the woman being carried in was 16 years old. The stone that names her Queen of England at Peterborough today was cut by other hands. Centuries later. The poison. Reading that Chapuys sent to Charles V in January of 1536 carried through the Habsburg archive, through the 16th century, through the historians of the 17th and the 18th and the 19th centuries. It carried through popular history into the 20th. It carried into the 21st. It is what most readers, if they have heard the story at all, still hear. The chandler at Kimbolton had stopped short of the poison reading. He had said what he saw. He had seen a black heart with a growth on the surface that resisted every wash. That was the report. The reading was added by the ambassador who received it, and by every writer who inherited the ambassador's version. The chandler had done the work. The pathology had been on the table for 490 years. It just took the rest of us that long to read it. If a body presented with weight loss to cachexia across 3 months, jaundice in the final weeks, chest pain the attendants attributed to the stomach, and a heart at autopsy, blackened on the interior of the ventricles with a visible growth on the outer wall that resisted every wash, would you sign the manner of death as homicide or as natural? Tell me which line you would put first, and what the pigment on the surface of that heart tells you before you sign. I read every comment. Thanks for watching.